Gregor Samsa wakes to find his life overturned in the most literal way possible. His body has become that of a monstrous insect. The description lingers on the grotesque. An armor-like back, a domed belly segmented like panels, and spindly legs thrashing about. Yet, despite the horror of the transformation, Gregor's first thoughts aren't screams of panic but mundane questions. What's happened? Was this a dream? His human surroundings, his modest room, the table with his samples for work, the framed picture of a lady in furs, remain unchanged, grounding the bizarre in the everyday. The contrast heightens the absurdity. His new alien body versus the ordinary continuity of his room and his job. Rather than spiraling into existential terror, Gregor's thoughts circle back to his wearisome life as a traveling salesman. He catalogs the misery of constant travel, poor meals, loneliness, endless train schedules, the tyranny of his boss. The metamorphosis seems almost secondary to the crushing routine he resents. Here, the author's dark humor surfaces. Gregor is less distraught about his monstrous body than about possibly missing his train. It's a brilliant twist on priorities, suggesting how deeply work has colonized his identity. His body, however, will not let him ignore it. Attempts to roll onto his side fail, his legs flail uselessly, and a dull new pain sets in. The small grotesqueries accumulate, an itch across his belly, strange white spots, a cold shudder at the touch of his own legs. These details emphasize the alienness of his form, but Gregor rationalizes them as though they were merely signs of overwork, or even a cold picked up on the road. His denial is striking. He sees symptoms of the impossible, yet interprets them through the lens of a salesman's exhaustion. The alarm clock's betrayal intensifies his panic. It's already far past his departure time, and his anxieties cascade. The boss will be furious. The office assistant will have reported him. The suspicion of malingering will arise if he calls in sick. His loyalty and fear of disgrace outweigh the reality of his condition, as if punctuality could undo his insect shell. This tension between the surreal body and the relentless grind of capitalist discipline is a razor-sharp irony the narration plays with. Family voices at the door deepen the unease. His mother's gentle call contrasts with the grotesque squeak that emerges when Gregor answers. The strange, altered voice shocks him, but his family seems reassured, only suspicious of his lateness. His father's heavier knocks and his sister's plaintive concern expose different tones of familial expectation and care. Locked doors separate them, both literally and symbolically. Gregor congratulates himself on the precaution of keeping them shut, as though some salesman's habit might still grant him control in a situation where his own body has become uncontrollable. The closing struggle to leave bed becomes almost epic in its futility. He experiments with angles and momentum only to crash painfully against the bedpost. His mind clings to methodical calculation, top half first, bottom half second, yet the chaos of his limbs resists every plan. Here, the writing shines with physical comedy sharpened into tragedy. A man trapped inside himself, bargaining between calm reason and physical impossibility. The sense of absurdity mixes with quiet dread, all the more powerful for its restraint. The fog outside Gregor's window mirrors his inner haze, thick, oppressive, offering no comfort or clarity. As the clock chimes 7, his thoughts tumble between denial and resolve. He imagines that stillness itself might undo the absurdity of his body, but time presses forward, forcing him to act. In a mix of calculation and desperation, he devises a risky maneuver to throw himself out of bed in one swing. The plan becomes almost playful in its absurdity, rocking back and forth like a child's game, yet the stakes are painfully adult. Noise, injury, exposure. His reasoning is chillingly practical, a mind still tethered to duty even while imprisoned in an uncooperative body. For a fleeting moment, he even dreams of help. 2 strong arms, his father's, the maid's, lifting him gently from bed. The thought makes him smile, a rare flicker of warmth in this suffocating scene. Yet he never calls. Locked doors seal him off, both from assistance and from human contact. The metaphor writes itself. Gregor, alienated even within his own home, is incapable of asking for the aid he so badly needs. His fragile balance tips into inevitability. At 7:10, the dreaded knock arrives. His company has sent none other than the chief clerk. The very fact of this visit speaks volumes about the crushing suspicion of his workplace. A single absence, and already an emissary comes pounding, armed with judgment. Gregor seethes inwardly at the absurdity of such mistrust, recognizing how little room there is for loyalty or humanity in his profession. Kafka's irony sharpens here. Gregor, transformed beyond recognition, is more concerned with corporate oversight than with his own monstrous condition. At last, with a thud muffled by carpet, Gregor crashes to the floor. Pain shoots through his head, but even this moment is overshadowed by the clerk's officious remark. "Something's fallen down in there." The banal response to an extraordinary situation exemplifies the story's dark comedy. Gregor imagines whether such a fate could ever befall the clerk, an almost whimsical thought that underlines his own isolation. The dialogue that follows is masterfully orchestrated. From one room, his father pleads and explains, pointing to Gregor's tireless dedication, his quiet evenings spent reading train schedules, even his small handicraft projects. From another, his mother adds her protestations of his good character. His sister weeps softly, a sound that pierces Gregor, though he cannot understand her distress fully. Each voice weaves a different chord of worry, pride, or shame, while the clerk embodies the cold face of commerce, his polished boots pacing, and his words bristling with suspicion. The speech the clerk delivers is merciless. Gregor is accused of stubbornness, unreliability, even dishonesty. The harshness contrasts brutally with the family's desperate defense, and Gregor, caught between pain and panic, finally bursts out in a torrent of words. He promises explanations, insists he is only slightly unwell, pleads for leniency, vows to catch the next train. His voice gushes with desperation, a flood of language that betrays how deeply he is still shackled to responsibility. Clumsy but determined, he struggles upright against the chest of drawers. Each failed attempt, each painful slide, embodies both his grotesque new body and his unbroken resolve. At last he stands, aching yet insistent, ready to reveal himself if only to end the unbearable tension. Gregor braces himself against a chair, gripping its edges with his twitching legs as the tense drama outside his locked door escalates. The chief clerk, baffled and skeptical, questions Gregor's words and hints that they make no sense at all. His mother, overwhelmed and frantic, bursts into tears, certain her son must be gravely ill, while his father snaps commands for a locksmith. The household erupts into hurried footsteps and cries, the confusion almost theatrical. Kafka captures the chaos with sharp precision, different voices cutting across one another, a family unraveling under the weight of fear, shame, and misunderstanding. Amid this turmoil, Gregor himself grows unexpectedly calm. He tells himself his voice sounds clear, even though it is incomprehensible to the others. Their rush for a doctor and locksmith reassures him, a sign they recognize his suffering and are ready to help. His optimism is touching, even naive. He does not distinguish between medical aid and mechanical force, both figures of authority in his mind. Believing this to be a turning point, he resolves to open the door himself. The task becomes grotesque and strangely heroic. Gregor hauls himself to the door and uses his adhesive legs to cling upright. Without hands, he must turn the key with his mouth, his jaw clamping hard as brown fluid oozes onto the metal. The act is humiliating and painful, yet carried out with determination. The sound of the lock snapping back is a victory, a small triumph that makes him proud. In his imagination, his family should be cheering him on, encouraging his effort. Instead, silence hangs heavy, broken only by the chief clerk's startled acknowledgement that the key is indeed turning. When the door finally opens, the reactions are devastating. The clerk recoils as if an invisible force were pushing him back, his face contorted in horror. Gregor's mother collapses into her skirts, fainting at the sight. His father clenches his fists in hostility before breaking into tears, his body shaking with grief. The tableau is rich with symbolism. Rejection, shame, and paternal rage crash together in a single moment while Gregor hovers half-seen, leaning awkwardly against the doorframe. Around him, ordinary details reinforce the surreal contrast. Breakfast dishes still clutter the table, newspapers scattered where his father lingered. A photograph of Gregor in uniform, once dignified and proud, now hangs like a cruel reminder of lost humanity. Even the rain outside seems complicit, its heavy drops echoing the oppressive atmosphere. Gregor, however, clings to his professional instinct. He addresses the chief clerk directly, pleading his case with a flood of words. He insists he is loyal, hardworking, and unfairly maligned. His speech is desperate, almost eloquent, laying bare his debt, his duty to his family, and the precariousness of his position. But the clerk does not listen. He edges steadily toward the exit, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed in terror. When he finally flees in panic, stretching his hand toward the stairwell as if salvation lay outside, the fragile balance breaks. Realizing the danger of letting him leave, Gregor makes a clumsy attempt to follow, to intercept, to salvage his livelihood. He thrusts himself forward, tumbles, and lands heavily. But then, something remarkable happens. For the first time, he feels at home in his new body. His legs, so chaotic before, grip the ground with certainty, moving as he commands. In this strange, bitterly ironic moment, Gregor tastes a fleeting sense of control. Gregor, exhausted, yet still clinging to hope, crouches on the floor and sways in place, almost convincing himself that his burdens are about to end. His mother's reaction, however, shatters this fragile illusion. At first, she seems hesitant, leaning forward as though to see him more clearly, but then recoils in terror. Her cry for help echoes her inability to reconcile recognition and fear. In her panicked retreat, she knocks over the breakfast table, spilling coffee across the carpet. Kafka slips in this sharp detail. A domestic accident, messy, trivial, occurs in the middle of a scene drenched in dread, heightening both absurdity and tragedy. Gregor, distracted by the smell of the coffee, snaps his jaws unconsciously, deepening his mother's terror and sending her into his father's arms. Meanwhile, the chief clerk edges away, clinging to the banister as he makes his final, horrified retreat. Gregor's instinct is to chase him, desperate to salvage his reputation and job. But instead of support, he meets his father's wrath. In a sudden panic, the father arms himself with the clerk's abandoned cane and a newspaper, driving Gregor back with stamping feet and frightening hisses. The imagery here is animalistic. The patriarch reduced to snarling, the son herded like a beast. Gregor's attempt to retreat is agonizingly slow. His body cannot move backwards gracefully, and his fear of a blow keeps him from turning around. At last, forced by necessity, he twists himself toward the door, his father directing him impatiently with the tip of the cane. The narrow doorway becomes a cruel trap. Gregor scrapes against it, leaving stains of his own blood and brown fluid as his body jams painfully in place. His father gives one final shove, sending him crashing into the room, injured and humiliated. The slam of the door closes not only the space, but also his fragile link to family and dignity. When Gregor awakens hours later, the house is quiet, the light dim. His left side is scarred, one leg useless, his body battered from the morning's violence. Yet hunger draws him to a dish of milk and bread, placed at the door. His sister's attempt at care. In a poignant twist, what was once his favorite drink now revolts him. Even in nourishment, estrangement grows. He turns away, rejecting what should comfort him. The silence in the household is heavy. He hears no familiar reading of the newspaper, no voices, only the faint gaslight and tiptoeing movements. Doors open slightly, then shut again, as if someone wants to enter but cannot bring themselves to face him. The family that once clamored to reach him now avoids him. The reversal is striking, rendered with delicate cruelty. Alone, uneasy in his own room, Gregor seeks shelter under the couch. Though cramped and pressing down on his body, it grants a sense of safety, as though concealment itself is soothing. The shame of hiding mixes with relief, showing his changing instincts. Through the long night, he wrestles with hunger, worry, and the resolve to remain patient for his family's sake. Morning brings a new test. His sister, anxious yet brave, enters his room. At first, she recoils in shock at seeing him under the couch, but almost immediately re-enters softly as though tending to a patient. This quiet act, tentative but deliberate, becomes the first fragile thread of connection between Gregor and his family in the aftermath of chaos. Gregor waits anxiously under the couch, peering out to see whether his sister notices the untouched dish of milk. His yearning is palpable. He hopes she will understand without him asking, yet he restrains himself from rushing forward to beg for something edible. When she removes the milk with a rag, refusing to touch it directly, the detail quietly underscores her mixture of care and revulsion. What she brings back is astonishing. Not a simple meal, but a whole spread of scraps, carefully chosen as if she were experimenting to discover his new tastes. Old vegetables, hardened sauce, bones, nuts, stale bread, and cheese, laid out on newspaper alongside a dish of water, form a humble but strangely generous offering. Gregor's delight is almost childlike. The cheese grips him with irresistible force, and he devours it first, followed by the vegetables and sauce. His new body craves what would once have been repulsive, and the discovery fascinates him. He notes, too, that his wounds seem miraculously healed, and wonders if he has grown less sensitive than before. There is an eerie irony in his thought. His insect body mends more efficiently than his human one ever did. The joy of eating is tempered by secrecy. When his sister unlocks the door again, he forces himself back under the couch, his body bloated from the meal, barely able to breathe. The image of him half suffocating in his hiding place, eyes bulging as his sister sweeps the scraps away without sentiment, captures Kafka's unsettling blend of comedy and cruelty. This routine becomes his new life. Twice a day, his sister feeds him in secrecy, timing it so the rest of the family never sees. Her efforts reflect both compassion and concealment, sparing their parents the distress of witnessing Gregor's altered existence. For him, this sisterly devotion becomes his only thread of connection. He listens constantly for sounds in the flat, pressing his body against doors to catch muffled conversations. Everything, it seems, revolves around him, though rarely with comfort. His family debates what to do. Meals are flavored with sighs, and even the maid, horrified, begs to be released from service. She departs in tears, sealing the household into a smaller, tighter circle of burden and secrecy. Through these overheard talks, Gregor learns of the family's finances. To his amazement, his father had secretly preserved a small reserve from his failed business, untouched for years, and even allowed Gregor's wages to accumulate. Behind the door, Gregor nods with excitement, moved by this hidden prudence. Once, he might have used that money to free himself from his hated job, but now he feels strangely pleased it has been saved. The irony cuts deep. The sacrifices he made, the endless labor that drained him, had been partly unnecessary. Yet instead of bitterness, he clings to pride, glad that his toil has provided comfort. His thoughts drift to his sister, the one person he still feels close to. He recalls her violin playing, her talent and dreams, and his own secret plan to send her to the conservatory, even at great expense. These memories stir tenderness and give him purpose, even as he sits trapped, listening in silence. Kafka's prose shines here, tender, biting, tragic, exposing how love and duty can persist even under grotesque transformations. The family's hidden savings, once a source of relief, quickly reveal their limits. Enough to sustain them for a year or two at most, the money cannot replace steady income. Gregor's thoughts dwell painfully on what this means for each member of his family. His father, heavy and sluggish after years without work, seems incapable of returning to employment. His mother, frail and asthmatic, struggles even to breathe. And his sister, just 17, had known only comfort, small pleasures, and her cherished violin. To imagine her pressed into labor fills Gregor with shame so strong that he collapses against the leather sofa, scratching at it through long, sleepless nights as regret consumes him. His old solace, the window, offers no comfort now. What once symbolized freedom is blurred into grayness, a merging of sky and earth, as if his vision itself is eroding. Kafka turns this shift into an image of isolation. Gregor looks outward, but the world recedes from him. His sister notices and gently accommodates, moving his chair to the window and leaving the pane ajar. Small gestures that are practical but also quietly tender. Yet these kindnesses sting him, for he cannot thank her, and the effort she exerts on his behalf grows heavier in his mind. Her behavior becomes ritualized, always rushing to fling open the window as if suffocating in his presence. Gregor cowers beneath the couch, aware of the strain he causes, longing to relieve her discomfort but powerless. The situation reaches a painful climax when she stumbles upon him by the window one day. Terrified, she retreats without entering. To spare her, Gregor drags a sheet over the couch to conceal himself, transforming his own space into a shrouded hiding place. The gesture is heartbreaking, an act of love that deepens his solitude. His sister leaves the sheet in place, perhaps with gratitude, but the veil marks the gulf widening between them. Meanwhile, His parents remain absent, unable to face him. They wait outside his door, relying on his sister's reports about his condition. His mother longs to visit, her pleas bursting into cries that she must see her unfortunate son, but is restrained by father and daughter. Gregor, overhearing, feels a yearning that is both tender and tragic. He wants her presence, believing she might understand him better than his young sister ever could. To occupy himself, he develops a new pastime, crawling the walls and ceiling. Suspended above, he feels freer, lighter, even oddly happy, as if his body has found its natural rhythm. His sister notices and decides to clear the room of furniture to give him space. Enlisting her mother's help, she attempts to move the heavy chest of drawers. But his mother resists, voicing fears that an empty room would signify abandonment, stripping Gregor of his past and any hope of recovery. Her whisper, meant for no one, believing Gregor cannot understand, pierces him deeply. In her words, he rediscovers his own need to hold on to traces of his humanity. What follows is a startling recognition. His desire to empty the room had nearly erased the continuity of his life. The furniture, burdensome as it might be, anchors him to memory, to identity. Kafka crafts this moment with exquisite irony. Gregor the insect clings to the very symbols of human life he cannot share, realizing that to lose them would be to lose himself. Greta, now assuming the role of authority in Gregor's life, insists on stripping the room bare. What began as a gesture of care turns into a determination to clear almost everything, leaving only the couch. Her reasoning, that Gregor needs space to crawl, is practical, but also reveals a new confidence and perhaps even a youthful zeal to dramatize his condition. Kafka draws this shift with precision. The once timid girl now dictates decisions, while her mother's gentler instincts to preserve familiar objects are overridden. The act of removing furniture becomes a symbolic battle over Gregor's humanity. The atmosphere grows tense as mother and daughter drag the heavy chest from the room. Gregor, distressed by the sound of scraping furniture and the dismantling of his past, cannot stay hidden. The writing desk, his old anchor for learning and work, is threatened. Memories crowd him. Childhood studies, early ambitions, all tied to that piece of wood. The more they empty his room, the more he feels assailed, as if his identity itself is being erased. In desperation, he rushes out, not to save the desk, but to cling to the picture of the fur-clad lady still hanging on the wall. Pressed against the glass, his body covers it, as though protecting the last emblem of beauty, dignity, and his former self. The image of him clinging to a decorative print, absurd and touching at once, shows Kafka's genius for capturing both comedy and tragedy in one stroke. Greta tries to spirit her mother away, planning to confront Gregor later, but her attempt only makes matters worse. His mother turns and sees him, an enormous, brown blot against the wallpaper. Her scream and fainting spell bring chaos. Gregor, instinctively wanting to help, tears himself from the picture and follows Greta, only to cause more disaster. Bottles shatter, medicine splashes across him, a cut mars his face. Shut out of his mother's room, he is left alone, anxious and guilt-ridden, his frantic crawling finally ending in collapse on the dinner table. Into this turmoil steps his father, transformed as if into another man entirely. Gone is the weary, sluggish figure Gregor remembers from his travels. Instead, he appears in a stiff blue banking uniform, gold buttons gleaming, cap tossed aside with casual force. His posture is erect, his eyes sharp, his presence commanding. This reborn patriarch embodies authority and discipline, his very clothing a badge of regained strength. For Gregor, the sight is shocking. The father who once leaned on him now looms as an adversary. What follows is a strange, tense dance. Father and son circle the room, Gregor scuttling, his father stamping, each shadowing the other in a slow, heavy rhythm. It is less a chase than a ritual of dominance, strictness embodied in boots and uniform. Gregor restrains himself from climbing walls, sensing it would provoke harsher wrath. The dynamic has reversed completely. Gregor, once the family's provider, now cowers before the father who asserts his power with silent determination. The scene is rich with symbolism, discipline confronting helplessness, order asserting itself against chaos, rendered with Kafka's unflinching clarity. Gregor, exhausted and short of breath, finds himself cornered in a brutal confrontation. His father, now emboldened in his new role as family head, pelts him with apples snatched hastily from a bowl. Kafka turns a simple fruit into a cruel weapon. One apple merely glances off Gregor's back, but another strikes deep, lodging into his flesh with unbearable pain. The image is unforgettable. Gregor pinned in place, writhing, as if nailed to the spot. In this harrowing moment, his mother hurls herself at her husband, skirts falling, arms wrapped around him, pleading for Gregor's life. The scene vibrates with raw emotion, violence, desperation, and the fragile thread of compassion that still binds the family. The lodged apple remains in Gregor's body for more than a month, a constant wound and symbol of his suffering. Yet, paradoxically, this injury softens his father's stance. For all the revulsion Gregor inspires, his family begins to treat him less as a monster and more as a burdensome relative, pitiful, but still their own. Reduced in mobility, he moves like an invalid, slow and heavy, ceiling climbing no longer possible. And yet, a small solace emerges. Every evening, the door to the living room is left open. From the shadows, unseen, Gregor watches his family in the warm lamplight, listening to their subdued routines. Once, he had longed for lively conversations when away on business trips. Now, those conversations are gone, replaced by quiet endurance. His mother bends under the lamp sewing lingerie for a fashion shop. Greta studies shorthand and French after long days at her sales job. And his father, obstinate in his shabby bank uniform, dozes in his chair, refusing even to change into a nightgown. Kafka's detail here is remarkable. The polished gold buttons against a stained, worn coat. The absurd dignity of a man clinging to the last trappings of authority. Evenings repeat in weariness. At 10, the women plead with the father to rest, only to meet his stubborn refusals. Finally, half-carried, he groans about his joyless life, while mother and daughter fuss helplessly around him. The family, once proud of Gregor's support, now labors desperately. The maid dismissed, replaced by a coarse charwoman. Jewelry sold, debts looming. The flat, too large for their means, becomes a suffocating reminder of decline, yet they cannot leave, for practical reasons, and because despair roots them in place. Gregor senses their exhaustion, their sorrow. His back throbs with pain, his body deteriorates. His sister, once tender, grows impatient. She pushes food in carelessly, sweeps it out untouched, leaves the room dirty. Once, Gregor tried to shame her by sitting among filth, but she ignored him. The bond between them frays as she claims his care as her territory, furious when their mother once dares to clean. That episode explodes into a heartbreaking quarrel, mother pleading, father raging, sister sobbing with clenched fists, while Gregor, humiliated, hisses in his darkened room. The family, broken and overworked, tears itself further apart, and Kafka shows it all with unflinching clarity, tenderness curdling into resentment, love bending under the weight of endless suffering. Gregor's world grows smaller and heavier as his sister, once so attentive, becomes worn down by her daily burdens. The arrival of the charwoman, a coarse elderly widow, shifts the balance of his care. Unlike the others, she shows no horror at his appearance, barging into his room with rough familiarity, calling him names like old dung beetle. Her bluntness strips away any last remnants of dignity he might have felt, though she never treats him with the same terror or delicacy as his family. When Gregor once moves toward her, her reaction is not fear, but defiance, chair raised in hand, ready to strike if he dares come closer. Kafka's brilliance lies in this unsettling detail. The grotesque becomes almost mundane, reduced to the level of casual mockery. Gregor himself is weakening. He barely eats, only toying with the scraps left for him. His room, once his private space, becomes a storage dump. Furniture, clutter, and even kitchen bins are shoved inside, making his environment more suffocating by the day. He drags himself through the piles, sometimes rearranging things for lack of space, but the effort leaves him drained and sorrowful. The symbolism here is powerful. Gregor's decline mirrors the family's loss of order, as his room reflects their desperation. Meanwhile, the household adapts in strange ways. 3 bearded lodgers move in, their presence casting a new shadow over the family. They demand tidiness, not just in their quarters, but throughout the flat. The Samsas, now reduced to servitude, treat these men with exaggerated deference. The contrast is striking. Once Gregor was the family's provider. Now outsiders occupy his place, consuming meals and attention. Kafka sharpens the tension with quiet irony. The lodgers test the food as if conducting an inspection, while Gregor, hidden in filth and hunger, whispers to himself that he is starving. It is music, however, that pierces this bleakness. After dinner one evening, the sound of Greta's violin rises from the kitchen. The lodgers, polite but unimpressed, request she play in the living room. Gregor's parents prepare everything with timid servility, offering chairs, arranging the scene as though hosting honored guests. Greta begins to play, her expression solemn, her face bent toward the music with delicate care. Drawn by the sound, Gregor creeps forward, forgetting his shame. Dust clings to his body, food scraps stick to his sides, yet the violin overwhelms all sense of his condition. He edges into the living room, his head low to the ground, straining to catch his sister's eyes. The lodgers mutter to themselves, clearly disappointed, their smoke curling like signals of indifference. Yet Gregor feels something extraordinary, a deep, almost human pull. He wonders if he can truly be called an animal when music stirs such yearning within him. For a fleeting moment, Kafka lets beauty and despair entwine, art reaching where words and relationships can no longer go. Gregor, worn and frail, longs only for one thing: connection with his sister through her music. In his imagination, he dreams of tugging gently at her skirt, keeping her close, and finally confessing his wish to send her to the conservatory, a secret sacrifice he had once planned for her future. The tenderness of these thoughts is haunting, for it is music, not work, not obligation, that draws him forward. But the reality shatters the moment. The tenants notice him. The middle lodger points a finger at Gregor, interrupting the fragile spell. Their reaction is less fear than irritation, tinged with insult. Gregor's father, desperate to salvage respectability, flails to calm them, pressing his body between them and Gregor as though shielding them from sight. In Kafka's hands, this scene plays with absurdity and dread. Authority, represented by these pompous men with beards, feels more dangerous than pity. Even Greta abandons her violin and busies herself with bedding, her small rebellion against the humiliation. The confrontation escalates when the tenants loudly declare their departure. Their words slice at the family's pride. They call the living conditions repugnant, refuse to pay rent, and even threaten legal action. The slam of the door seals their disdain. Mr. Samsa, overwhelmed, collapses into his chair, not asleep, but blank with shock. The family's fragile financial stability vanishes in that instant, and all eyes shift back to Gregor, lying still, weakened by hunger and the collapse of his plan to prove his devotion. It is then that Greta's voice rises with clarity and cruelty. She calls Gregor a monster and insists they must get rid of him. Her words, trembling yet resolute, crack like a verdict. She accuses him of tormenting them, of driving out the tenants, of destroying what little life they have left. Her father, worn down, murmurs agreement. Even their mother, gasping with illness, can no longer shield him. Kafka's narration here is both chilling and painfully human, showing how compassion erodes under the grind of exhaustion and fear. Gregor, meanwhile, struggles to turn back toward his room, his body racked with pain. The act is laborious, his head striking the floor as he tries to maneuver himself. Yet in his own mind, his effort is full of goodwill. He only wishes to retreat, not to terrify. His family watches in silence, their expressions empty, their strength gone. His mother slumps into sleep. His father sits stunned. And Greta waits by the door with determination. At last he reaches the threshold. The door slams, bolted swiftly by Greta, who declares to her parents with finality, "At last." Left in the darkness, Gregor feels no outrage. His frail body gives way. His legs fold under him. Strangely, there is comfort in the stillness. The pain that has consumed him for so long begins to ebb, fading into a slow, inexorable calm. Gregor's final hours unfold with a haunting gentleness. The apple that had once pierced his back, now rotted and encrusted with dust, barely registered in his failing body. His thoughts turned not to resentment, but to his family, suffused with a quiet, aching love. In a rare moment of peace, he accepted what even his sister had wished for, his departure, and as dawnlight crept in, his breath slipped softly away. The prose here is striking in its restraint, transforming pain into stillness and closure. It was the charwoman who discovered him. True to her blunt, almost comic nature, she mistook his silence at first for stubbornness, prodded him with a broom, and only then realized the truth. Her shrill announcement, "Stone dead," ripped through the household. The Samsas rushed in, stunned, but quick to accept what they saw. Mr. Samsa crossed himself and even voiced thanks to God, while Greta, gazing at her brother's thin and wasted body, remarked on how little he had eaten. Kafka's irony shines in the contrast between Gregor's silent, tender end and the coarse manner of his discovery, a reminder of how the ordinary often eclipses the profound. The lodgers, demanding their breakfast, were ushered into Gregor's room by the charwoman, who treated his body like a curiosity. But this intrusion was swiftly cut off by Mr. Samsa's unexpected firmness. Dressed in his uniform, flanked by his wife and daughter, he expelled the men with quiet authority. Their pompous resistance crumbled quickly. Humbled, they left without a word. The family watched them descend the stairs until even their presence became irrelevant. In this moment, the Samsas reclaimed their home. With the oppressive presence of both Gregor and the tenants gone, a remarkable shift took place. They sat together to write letters excusing themselves from work, a small but symbolic act of reclaiming time. The charwoman tried to linger with gossip about "that thing in there," but Mr. Samsa silenced her, promising her dismissal. What had once been chaos was now being carefully closed off, each intrusion removed one by one. Then, for the first time in months, the family ventured outside together. The tram carried them into open countryside, the carriage bathed in sunlight. They spoke of the future, moving to a smaller, more practical flat, pursuing jobs with promise, reshaping their lives with a newfound sense of possibility. Amid this talk, a subtle yet powerful image emerged. Greta, once weighed down by fatigue and despair, now seemed vibrant, her cheeks flushed with youth. Her parents, exchanging a look, silently acknowledged her growth, her transformation into a young woman with prospects of her own. And when they reached their stop, Greta rose first, stretching her body in the sunlight, a living emblem of renewal and the life that continues forward.